Okay, we are at the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. We always appreciate you joining us for an hour so we can bring you up to speed on some different things, teach you some things, all of that stuff. So once again, if you're new, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome as well. And we're going to get right into our content today. So, as usual, this is always for you. We do these sessions for you to bring as many fresh ideas and better understanding, practical guidance as we possibly can. We try to think of different sessions all the time and, bring those to you to help you out. This is being recorded. It'll be out on the community, hopefully later on this afternoon or early tomorrow morning, as well as on our YouTube channels. So don't feel like you have to take notes because you can watch it again. But if you want to take notes, you're always welcome to do that as well. Please use the Q&A. If you can use the Q&A rather than the chat, that would be great. There are other panelists that are on the call that can answer questions. And if they can answer those questions via the Q&A, then they'll do that for you. If it is something that we can ask during the actual presentation demo, then we can stop and ask that as well. And if there's any questions that are unrelated to the content, please feel free to ask those as well. We may not stop the presentation to answer those particular questions, but if at the end of the presentation demo, if we have time, then we can definitely go into those. But again, because of the panelists that we have on, that question may absolutely be answered via type. So Safe Harbor, always want to put this out there. I don't necessarily know that we have anything in this that falls underneath it, but it's always a great idea for us to put it in there. So again, please make sure that you're aware of the Safe Harbor and, don't make any financial decisions based on what you've heard today. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am the host and presenter today. And I see that we have Adam and Dan. Tara may be showing up here shortly, or she could be busy. I don't know. But these are the panelists that we'll have on today. So again, please feel free to ask questions. These guys are highly intelligent and they know ServiceNow inside and out, and they can definitely answer those questions. So with that, today we're actually going to talk about manual indicators and best practices around those. So I guess a really good question, and maybe you can do it via raising your hand or whatnot. The question is, how many of you actually use manual indicators or have used manual indicators? Manual indicators are generally there for when you have data that you need to report on that is not inside of the platform, or if there's just something that you need to enter some raw scores for, and you can do that via the score sheets. So looks like we have some hands that are going up. So that's good. We have some people that have used manual indicators. So hopefully you'll get something out of this. And if you haven't, then hopefully this will encourage you to use these for particular reasons, not just to use them. We like to think that manual indicators are really powerful for testing. So anytime that you need to perhaps test some data, manual indicators is probably a good direction for you to go. So with that, what is a manual indicator? So like I said, manual indicators are generally there for you whenever you have data that is maybe not inside the platform, but you also still need to report on that. Manual indicators is a really great source for you to pull that data in and then actually see that information. I just saw Tara's facilitating another call. But if you need to actually import some information, some data inside of the platform, and then actually report on that, you can use manual indicators because maybe it's not in a particular table or inside of the platform or something like that. So you need to use the ability to have the score sheet where you can input numbers individually for that particular stuff. So again, we like to stress that, the best solution for this is testing. So you can use this to test out your data and things of that nature. So note, so you must have a subscription to Performance Analytics in order to create the manual indicators, and the roles that are actually needed in order to create the manual indicators: PA admin, PA power user, or admin. If you're using domain separation, the indicator is created in the domain that you're actually in. So if you move with between multiple domains, understand that the domain that you created that indicator is where it actually sits. So with that, So let's actually create a manual indicator to show you that process, or maybe if you haven't done it in a while, maybe it'll help refresh you, and just to show that you can actually do that. So in the filter navigator, all you have to do is search for manual indicator and select that. And it is very similar to creating, using a form to create anything else. Here you can see we don't have any currently, so we're going to create a new one. I'm going to give it a name. I personally want to put in maybe something manual to kind of let me know, because it will actually, it's in the PA indicators table. So all of those will list together. And of course, I'm always big about descriptions. So I always put one of those in there, and maybe the unit, because it's just going to be a score, I've selected pound, and I want to publish that on the Analytics Hub. So that way I can actually see the data once I put the data in. So here, and that kind of repeats, but let me go to it here back down to the end so you can see sort of the final result of that, and pause it. Man, that thing's fast. So I just kind of want to show you. So here's the end result. So we have incident count is manual. So that is letting me know that this is a manual indicator. I have selected a number because it's going to be a whole number. And my precision, I don't have any, I don't expect any decimals with this. So I just leave it as 0. And then, like I said, I'm going to publish it on the Analytics Hub, because that is a very fast way without me actually even having to create an indicator or anything, or anything else to actually, I can see that directly on there. And I may not necessarily need a widget, because potentially it's test data, maybe it's not, but I don't necessarily need a widget in order to see this. I can see it directly on the Analytics Club. I mean, Analytics Hub is definitely not a club. So, the other thing to think about here is who's actually going to contribute this data. So if there's multiple people or one person or something like that, that is going to actually input the data for you, then you would definitely want to put them here so they can have access to actually put in that data. Now, that contributor also can be used for some other things that we'll talk about a little bit later, where you can actually, know who's putting it in and whether or not they put in the data. Maybe there's a time frame that they have to put in data, things of that sort. So having that contributor filled out could benefit you, definitely, because it gives somebody the access to do it, but also there's some other things that you could do on top of that to actually use that. And again, make sure that that contributor has the appropriate role in order to be able to add content to that. So you can add breakdowns to manual indicators as well. And here you can see that I don't have any breakdowns, so why not add some? So I'm going to go right down to the breakdowns tab, and I'm going to select edit, and I'm just going to look for priority. Now there's multiple priorities here, but I'm just going to select the first one in my list, which I know is associated to incident, and you can actually see that there down at the bottom. I'm going to move that over, and now when you actually look at the score sheet, you'll see, or the scores for the indicator, you'll see that now we have breakdowns associated with that. And I want to pause that. There we go. So now you can see this is a score sheet that looks very similar to an automated indicator that perhaps you've created in the past. And now you can see that I can actually break down scores based on priority. Now you could add breakdown of category or subcategory or state, any whatever. I'm just using priority because it's a simple one to add. So again, you can use that information and break down those scores that you input based on that. So with that, we should probably just add some scores to the actual score sheet. So here you can see that I've clicked into it, and this is going to kind of speed up here a little bit because you don't want to watch me add all those, but I'm adding numbers to all of those different priorities, and for every one of the days that I'm actually going to look at, and then we'll have scores for that, and then we can actually see those directly in the Analytics Hub. So you also notice that once you click off of those, they're auto saved, so there's no saving for you to do. So we're now going to look at the Analytics Hub and see our data. Now notice here we have an issue, right? So one of the things with manual indicators that is not there with an automated indicator is the summing of all of those different scores based on breakdown. And you will get this pop-up to let you know that wait a minute, something's not wrong. And obviously, because we're not seeing any data here on the Analytics Hub, so we put in the data, so where is it at? So one of the things that you have to do is you actually have to sum up that data. So again, remember, that's something that you have to do with a manual indicator, you don't have to do that with an automated indicator because the data collection itself will actually do all of that for you. So let's go to the next slide and let's see that. Maybe there we go. So here you can see that I'm adding up all of those. Now, again, another process that, do you want to do that on a regular basis? So it definitely is something to think about when you're using manual indicators. It shouldn't be something that you use all the time. Think about testing, how many indicators out there are you going to have that are manual that you're actually wanting to go in here and update all of this information. But now that I've totaled up those scores, and again, I got out my handy dandy calculator and did that, although those are very small numbers. I was able to do that in my head. But think about if it was very big numbers, the fact that you would actually have to add all that information up is another step that you would actually have to do. So now that we've done that, now we can go back to the scores and are actually showing the Analytics Hub, and you can see here now we actually have data. And remember, because we have breakdowns, we can see that information by those particular breakdowns. So again, you won't see any of this information if you don't add up your scores. But the fact that we did now, like any other indicator that's out there, we have added this information and we can see it out on the Analytics Hub. So before I go on to maybe some next steps, are there any questions that come in from my panelists? There's a script question.
Just the one about scripting, which I think we'll either try to handle in text or offline.
Okay. I see the one comment in the chat from John that says we have actually written complicated scripts to update manual indicators. Yeah, so you can definitely get into writing some scripts depending on what you're actually trying to update and who you're allowing to update and how often you're wanting to update that stuff. But with that in mind, the question is that, can we improve the experience? Can we do something that potentially makes this somewhat more simplistic, easier? Is there a way to potentially add scores for any one of our manual indicators in one source, as opposed to having to go to all the different score sheets for all those different manual indicators? Now, I know I keep saying this, but I want to make sure that I hammer it in. Hopefully you don't have hundreds of manual indicators, and definitely not thousands of those, because I guess the question is, what are you using them for? What's the purpose of those? Have you not been able to figure out a way to automate that process? What's the idea behind having so many manual indicators? And that brings up some of the questions that you can see here. Could we create a table that actually updates the scores for all of the manual indicators? Could we do that? Can we save time by having one table to update rather than multiple score sheets? Can we create an automated indicator based off of that table that we create? And then now you're adding information to a data collection job and it's all automated. We actually can do that. And that is a really great way of saving some time and housing all of that information at one location, and then being able to select between the multiple different manual indicators that you have out there. So with that, we're going to create a table. Now, one of the things that may be popping up in some of the heads, well, that cost. Yeah, you're right. It does. There is a cost potentially. And I think maybe Adam may have some thoughts around that. But if we create a table and we reference the PA indicators table where not only the automated sit, but also the manually sit, we can now actually update scores for all of those on a daily, today, tomorrow, the next day or whatnot, and actually update that. So here you can see I'm creating a table, and I've named my table manual indicator automation because I want to automate this information. I'm adding a couple fields to it, name, which I'm going to reference back to the PA indicators, because that's going to give me the ability to actually select that particular manual indicator that I've already created and add scores to that. I'm going to add a score and I'm going to make that a decimal, which is the same exact thing that it is in the PA or in the PA scores table. It is a decimal. So I want to do that same exact thing. And then I want to put in a date. So when is the scores that I'm putting, what are they relevant to? Which date are they actually relevant to? So just by adding those three particular ones, I can update some manual indicators not necessarily the actual manual indicator, but when I actually use this, an indicator source and then an automated indicator later on, I can actually see that information. Now, you can also add in a field for breakdowns and that element if you choose to do that, so you can get a little bit more granular with the information that you're actually putting in. But with us, like I said, creating this particular table, we can actually input some scores for each one of those. And let's see what that looks like. So here's the question. This is the amount of manual indicators that I have in my personal PDI, okay? The question that I have is how many do you have, and what's the justification for the however many that you have? I would say a great number, and obviously everybody is different, every business is different, but like this shouldn't be hundreds and thousands of manual indicators, because if that's the case, then there's something else probably going on, and there's probably some sort of integration that we need to help somebody with to do that. So all that I have for 4, and these are just examples. These may not be the same examples that you have. The question is, why would you need to add in incidents or requests or text? All that information is there. You're right. But these, again, are just examples. One of the things that Adam and I talked about prior to doing this was NPS, man. Maybe you need to add in some NPS scores or whatnot into that. But here you can see this is the indicator table that we're looking at. And these are all of the ones that are in that indicator table that are actual manual. So again, hopefully you don't have hundreds or millions or whatnot that you have out there. Adam, I know that you typed something, but is there something that you want to speak to before I continue?
There was something earlier that we were talking about with the indicators, but I want to reiterate about the manual indicators. The manual indicators were intended for testing, and when we do have them, we want to make sure that there's very few of them. And is it something we really should be using an integration for, right? As we talked about it, and what the model we like to see more of is what we're talking about here with the table and automated indicators. When it's in production, I want everything to be an automated indicator and automated, and only use the manual to put data in, to mock data up, quick workaround. That's why it's there. But to be careful. So I'm interested in what types of things we are using manual indicators for. What data are we missing, and how else we can solve them? So I'd love to see in the chat what types of data they're putting in, and maybe we'll have some follow-ups about how else we can approach that, how we make it easier for you to come through.
Yeah, great points. John did say that they have around 40. So curious what he said special situations. So I'm sure they're all justified, really good situations. But like you said, I think I'm curious as well if people are using them, what they're actually using them for. So just some things to keep in mind whenever you're creating the manual indicators, like Adam says, ideally for testing, but sometimes situations change and you may need those for others. So with that, so let's create some scores for our new table. So here I'm just going to select one of the manual indicators that I have. I'm just going to put in a date of today, and I'm just going to put in a number, a random number, and then click submit. And then I'm going to do that a few times for the 4. I'm going to add one for all 4 of the indicators, manual indicators that I have. If you notice, because we made that a reference to the PA indicators table, now when you select the name, you can search for any of the ones that you have on there. So now think about if you're adding those on a daily basis. And I don't know whether or not you are or you're not. When I'm looking at the 2 that have said we have 40 and we have 85, my question would be, one, are you updating those score sheets some sort of automated way? And if you did that, then kudos to you. You made it very simplistic and you've done that. Or if somebody or someone is doing that daily or even monthly or weekly or quarterly or whatnot, the fact that they're having to go into each one of those score sheets and do that Now this one table could house all of that same information, and you could do all of them. Let's say that you needed to update all 40 or all 85 of those at one time. You could easily go in here and add each one of those, find the particular indicator that you're talking about, add the score, put on the date, and go through all of those, which is one location. Yeah, you have to click for each one of those and add those, but I would think going and looking for each one of those indicators, going into it, clicking on scores for this indicator, adding that, this would actually make life a little bit simpler for you. Now, understand, we're not, by this process, we're not updating the actual manual indicator. We're creating a table that has the manual indicator name, and we're creating a score, and you're going to use this as an indicator source going forward, right? So now you can report on this information the same way that you would any other table, by creating an indicator source and an automated indicator, and then adding that to a data collection job, and then creating a widget, or actually viewing it directly into the analytics hub, right? So that is the big thing with this process that gives you the ability to make things more simplistic, just simply by not having to click into all of those particular score sheets for each one of those manual indicator. So here I'm going to create an indicator source, right? I'm going to create an indicator source that's going to point to the new table that we have created. And here, because I have entered 4 scores, when I create this, I'm just going to give it a name, and you can name it whatever you choose to. And then I'm actually going to use the table that we've just created as our facts table. And when I click on preview, I got to learn how to spell first. When I click on preview, you'll see, I actually misspelled indicators right here. You'll see that we now are seeing the 4 scores that we actually entered. So now you're actually have an indicator source that you're using, the same table that you're adding scores to. And I'm just going to add date on today, which would be the same 4, because I entered all those on today. And now you can create an automated indicator on that particular indicator source. So the question is, why would you want all 4 of those different ones in automated indicator? You wouldn't, right? So that's where having the additional conditions, I'm going to create an indicator, and I'm going to name it, and then I'm going to add an additional condition where now I'm actually looking at the name. So maybe I only want to see the counts for incident manual counts, right? So I add in that additional condition. It is a column inside of my table. And now I actually have the ability to look at those particular ones, right? So this is, you've all seen this before. You've created an automated indicator. You've added an automated indicator to a data collection job, and you've actually showed it on the analytics hub or the inside of a widget on a dashboard. The big thing that we want you to take away from this is the ability to take all of that score creation and put it inside of one particular table. And with that, I want to pause. Do we have some questions?
There's some comments, some questions that have come in. I think we'll talk more about at the end. There's some great ones in here. I do want to discuss, but they're not. But I think if you're going right now, we should be good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to actually leave my presentation, and I'm going to go to Google, and we'll actually, if I can, where are you at? That is always the struggle.
So as you're finding that, I'm going to talk about one of the themes that came up, which is about scripting to load it into the table. So the model we're talking about today, where we load it into a table and then use an automated indicator, allows us to put logic in. So the logic we're using today is a human types it in, which is fine, right? That's the equivalent of a manual indicator. But we want to move past that to be able to say, an integration is loading the data. So I see some examples about call center data, third-party system. I may not want to use an external indicator that's got some limitations in the database and all that stuff, but I can use Integration Hub to pull, whether I'm pushing or pulling, however we want to get the data in to create that same record, which is this count, this date for this indicator. I can have Integration Hub load that data straight into that table and then run an automated indicator. So I can replace the manual part with an integration pretty simply, just a standard integration, whether I'm pushing or pulling the data. If I'm running a script to do a calculation, also we can do the same thing. Now, a lot of those scripts I want to look at a job to calculate that. We have PA scripts for some of the cases. We have function fields in some cases to do it. But I still want to go straight and I want to go to a temporary table, and whether in this case we called it the manual indicator table. I don't want to write directly into the scores table for one big reason. There's no API to do that, and we have and we will change that table to optimize it. So if you've been a customer since before Istanbul, which is several years ago, we originally had one table, the PA scores table. And I believe it was starting in Istanbul. We switched from the scores table to the scores L1 and L2. Completely transparent to users. It's all in the background, but it performs better. It uses a tenth of the space or something to that effect for most customers. So huge space reduction, better performance, and we've continued to optimize for the new data model. But if you, we still have a few customers that are using the old PA scores table. If you're writing directly to the PA scores table, that script will break when you migrate to the L1, L2 tables. And if we make another change, it might break again. To come through and stuff you have to update. If you use this model where you're writing to your own table and then using an automated indicator, that's the use case we support, because it looks just like your manual data looks just like any other data in the instance, whether we're counting incidents or summing your manual data. So if you are writing directly to it, the scores table, you don't have to do something today, but you do want to look at getting out of that or about directly writing and moving it to whether it's an import set table or a custom table you create. Look at doing that, because it's going to insulate you. It's going to make your upgrades easier and faster, right? Smoother and less headaches and less crisis if something comes up. And again, it allows us to more smoothly transition from manual to automated, because PA doesn't care. PA is just reading data from a table like it does for anything else. And breaking that into two components allows us to have smoother upgrades, less headaches. All right, Thomas, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So all I was going to do at this point, and I think this really gives us an opportunity to have quite a bit of Q&A time here, which I think is people love that. But really, the next steps here are adding it to a data collection job and then running the data collection job. And then now you're actually able to see that information on the Analytics Hub or added into a widget. So again, I think for the party that we have here, these are all PA people. That's probably something that obviously everyone has done. But if you've created an automated indicator before, you know the steps that are part of that. You have to have an indicator source. You have to add an automated indicator, create an automated indicator, use an indicator source, then add it to a data collection job, and then actually add it to a widget if you choose to, or view it in the Analytics Hub. And you can see here when I click on Show Analytics Hub, a very similar message that we had before. And that's because we haven't added our automated indicator to a data collection job. And I think for the purposes of here, so we can answer a lot of questions, I don't think that we necessarily need to go through that step. But again, as soon as you add it to a data collection job and run that collection job, then the data will be there for you. The big thing to take away from what we've shown you today is the ability to have a one source, quote unquote, to add scores to your for your manual indicators. The other thing to think about as well is you could definitely create an app where you can make this even more user friendly and make it nice and polished front end, where people could add whoever you chose to. You could add them, and they could actually add the scores there, and then you could make that represent that in the filter navigator, where things can be added to it. As I was talking about a little bit before about the contributor, so when you have a contributor that's associated with a score sheet, let's say that you decided not to go this particular route, but you had a score sheet, and you could definitely generate some, write some things, create some things to generate some notifications. Because if you expect someone to add scores to whatever manual indicator that you had, let's say on a daily or a weekly basis, and that hasn't been done yet, then you can definitely create some notifications and or create some tasks to have somebody actually add those scores. Another thing that is really important, and Adam and I were talking about this, is making sure that you potentially put some ACLs on that, so somebody can't change previous data, right? They can only add new data. Because if the data is there, then that data was probably good. What's really the reason? I guess there could be a reason why you would want to change something previously, but you can definitely write some ACLs on that. So there's really a lot of different things that you can do to make manual indicators much more intuitive and a lot easier to manage and maintain. The question is just how many manual indicators do you have? Is there a reason to justify adding another table, which potentially could be some cost? Those are questions, obviously, that you have to ask within your organization. But there's a lot of different things. There's ways of automating this to make it a little bit more simpler than, like I said, going into each one of those manual indicators, clicking on scores for this indicator and adding those scores to it. So with that, I think let's give a lot of time to some questions. And do we have some that we want to answer, or I always like to pass it back to you, Adam, or even Dan. Dan, I know you have some experience in manual indicators as well, so you're definitely feel free to add anything that you'd like to this.
So I want to pile on to what you said about manual indicators. So with a manual indicator and contributor, that's fine for you. If you're on this call, you can, and you're the only one who has manual indicators, it's okay, because you can do whatever you need to do. But as we want to extend, and we want to have the right people put the data in, so I don't have to just copy data. That's where this table really helps. In PA, in the old scores table, there was a created by, updated by. In scores L1, L2, there's no created by, there's no updated by. It's just the date and the score, which means there's no audit. I don't know who put this record in. I don't know if somebody changed it. And if this data is important, which it generally is, I don't want people making changes, and I don't want make people making changes that I don't know about. By putting it in a separate table, I have a source that will track who created it, when it was entered, who audited it last. I can turn on auditing on that table. I can go to the dictionary and turn on auditing, and it will actually show me every change that happens. And again, if this data is important to be able to look at, then I want to be able to do that. I can audit incidents. I can audit who changed the state on task. And this manual data, most of the time it's going to be fine, but I want to be able to have that audit. And this table is going to allow me to do that. The ACL is about not changing historic data. You can't do that in the score sheet, right? You have the power to change past, future, which absolutely makes sense in testing. I just need to put this in there. As a PA admin, you can go in the score sheet. To be clear, the score sheet is there for automated indicators as well. You as a PA admin can go in and change the value of an automated indicator, which if you recollect would get overwritten, but it'll allow you to do it. And there's no audit of that. This table allows me to have auditability, allows me to put controls in place. I can have people submit what the score should be. I can have a workflow to approve when things get put in, or have an approval required to change an old one, but new ones they can just submit. We were doing it in the form view. I could do it in list edit and just type in the scores. I can create a workspace to do it. Whatever I need to do to be able to do it manually, I can do that and create a nice experience that's secure and auditable and governed. That gives me governance for that. And it also leads me down the path to automation. I want to automate everything. So I might be typing that in manually today. Somebody had a use case in the chat where they're monitoring their support cases from ServiceNow, and we don't have an integration to our system. Okay, that's true. It is just manual data that's coming in. that's perfectly fine to do something like this. But if I'm pulling in cases from my contact center, my customer support center, well, there can be an integration with that. So using this model lets me do manual today, and in Q3 we're going to come back and do an integration with very few to no changes, just enhancements, just adds to it. So lots of reasons why there are absolutely reasons why we need to have this concept of manual indicator, but by using this design pattern, we get all the governance and visibility into it that we want as well. So we're not saying don't do that, but we're saying let's do it the way that we get everything we want and not make any compromises on it.
And truly understand the potential consequences of allowing anyone to, or even a limited number of people to do that, and to manually update the scores tables.
Yeah, and someone brought this in, and actually we were talking about before about VA. If I'm using this table again, I'm not going to have a VA do stuff to my scores table, and there's no API for it. But in this case, in this table with the right ACLs and the right permissions, maybe I even have VA. I'll just let somebody put a message in Teams going, my support cases for January, or set my support cases for January to 12. Right? 2, none. Nobody has any support cases. Everything's awesome. I do understand that, but you can do whatever you want to do to use the full power of PA of ServiceNow to make this really simple, easy use case without exposing that score sheet. The score sheet is very, very powerful, and you need to be very concerned, monitor, want to use the right word, diligent about who has access to the score sheet, even for a single indicator. And this allows us to give us a lot more governance and visibility into it.
Yeah, and I think even something else on the score sheet is there is the capability to take this table and do some workflows that would actually update the score sheet, but that would require some scripting and things of that sort. And we try to, as much as we can, stay away from that. But there are possibilities there as well. If obviously if you have someone that knows how to do that, but you can definitely workflow that. But
don't write to the scores table. There's no API. It's going to break. So I'm. Don't write to the scores table unless there is a spoke that ServiceNow is supporting to do it, and you use it in Flow Designer. Again, things are stable, but we have changed it. We reserve the right to change it. We have changed it, and we probably will change it again. On whenever we can make PA better, we'll do that. And you don't want to be querying, inserting, or reading data from the scores table directly. You always want to use the PA scorecard API to pull data out. Mm-hmm. And if we're writing directly to it, understand that it's going to break at some time. I don't know when. We don't do it purposely, but we do purposely make PA better and optimize it. So we want to find a different solution on how to push that logic more to the left earlier on. So when we talk about scripts in general, we have PA scripts. I don't like those either. We want to materialize that on the table. When we can, that's not always possible. We can write to whatever logic we want to have. We can write it to a table and then query that table. By doing it in 2 steps, you're going to make it more modular, more reusable. You're going to make it, you're going to make your life easier. It's a couple more steps now, but you're going to be more future-proof. Upgrades are going to be smoother and easier. You're not going to get caught off guard. What you don't want to do is upgrade and then, a month later realize that your stuff's just not working. Because it may or may not throw an error. It just doesn't work the way you think it does. But using the design pattern Thomas reviewed, you're going to be pretty future-proof.
That last point you just made there, Adam, I think that's kind of what I wanted to answer Candy's question out of the Q&A on the she's trying to create it's somewhat related to the manual indicators, but a manual breakdown based on extracting the month from a date field. So basically using a scripted breakdown mapping, but first a script to pull the month of the year out of a date field, and then use that as my value for matching up against a scripted great breakdown mapping. I think that's a great use case for populating that field within your source table.
Yes, but I also don't. There are a few use cases for this, but I always get concerned when we look at dates on dates because PA is intrinsically date centric. So the use case I've seen for having a date field on top of PA is where I'm forecasting for a future date, and I need to look at what my forecast was and compare the accuracy of the forecast. It really hurts my brain every time I think about that kind of stuff. So the question I have for Candy, and we can take you off mute if you want to come ask this. As to what date field are you doing? Is this just an issue where you want to be able to visualize the PA scores by month and see the trend by month, or are you actually looking at the trend of the month for a different month? Again, gets to be some really complex mental gymnastic, which makes sense in some use cases. But I want to make sure that we're not just saying I want to be able to filter by month, because the next experience stuff has a lot better enhanced kind of date picker stuff that's helped to get through some of these use cases.
So it's the second scenario. We're trying to capture the vulnerabilities that are open or closed on a given date, and then look at them based on the month that they were published. So the month is coming out of the date published field, if that makes any sense.
Oh, okay. So I want to look at in July, what month the cases were created on.
Yeah, basically.
So the way that I you get that makes sense. I get what's coming through. The way I've handled that in the past is I don't do the month because that looks weird. I look at the age. So I'll create an age bucket. So how many months old was it? Because then I can trend that over time. I actually don't care that from my use case in July that it was closed in May. What I care about is that was 2 months old or X number of days. Yeah, let's go 2 months. That's 2 months old. So that way I can compare the burn down rate of age and the age of my backlog. It's I am looking at my age of my backlog and the burn down of the age to come through rather than May. And then you have to look at, was it May 23 or May 22 or May 24? So that's where I think we struggle with some of that as to what are you trying to do with that? Which we don't have to answer today. We can talk about it for some time, but I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. I'm trying to meet the customer's requirements, so I can see if they're willing to switch how they look at things and do it that way.
Yeah, right, because then it gets easier, right? Then it's just a PA script. PA scripts are allowed. You all have my permission. It's going to be on YouTube and the rest of the world. You have my permission to use a script as long as it has current start or current end. Start date or start score start or score end in it. It's got to be date based, right? If it's not date based, then there's a better way to do it. But PA scores exist because of date comparisons. Anything that's not a date comparison that doesn't have current score start or score end can be done a different, better way. But again, the duration and Dan's on the call. Dan taught me this. It's say no, right? And no, it's not a great answer, but we have to go, what are you going to do with this? Right? It's super hard to do. And it doesn't do it. Like I have no idea what decision you're going to make. And if we understand what are you trying to get, we understand the breakdown, and it's going to help everybody who's on the call. If you have a question, like I'm trying to get a month, you get specific like that and you ask me, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to tell you how to do it. But the better question is, what are we trying to do? And what we want to understand? We want to understand our breakdown age. How old is our backlog age? Okay, well, that's great because you're talking about vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities is fine. But incidents, problems, changes, cases, HR cases, CSM cases, vulnerabilities, we all have a backlog problem. So when you can generalize your problem of, I want to know the age of my backlog and my burn down of my backlog, when you can phrase the question like that, which is when you can get your end user to see the question like that, I now have thousands or hundreds of thousands of more people to ask, how do I do this? I also have the ability to go rip it off from ITSM. I'm not above that, right? Good artist copy, great artist steal. As you're looking for, ITSM's got to have some. CSM is always super insightful into backlog, right? Because it's directly CSAT. My vulnerability doesn't get upset with me. directly because the vulnerability has been open for 3 weeks. But if I have a customer case open for 3 weeks, they're very upset with me. So if you're looking at analytics that are kind of beyond what out of the box does for you for that app, go look at a different app and then just go look how it's set up. You all have access to personal developer instances, PDIs. I hope you all have a PDI set up. You go to developer.servicenow.com, you get your own little instance, and you can install whatever you want. You can reset it and zboot it anytime you want. But you can go look at other stuff and just go see how the indicators is set up. So for yours, feel free to follow up in the community post and tag Thomas. He'll answer. But we can help you explain it. But the monthly breakdown, again, it's just challenging because they go, what do we want to do? And everything I want to see in PA, I want to be able to compare. PA's power is comparison, comparing to other groups. So with breakdowns, indicators without breakdowns is a little weird to me. It's not, again, there's value for everything. And if my CEO wants to see it, I'm going to do it. But what are the breakdowns so I can compare others? And then PA is I'm going to compare over time. I'm always going to compare over time. And so it has to be the same thing over time, right? And so we're going to normalize targets based off of the vulnerability not the number of vulnerabilities, but the number of vulnerabilities per CI, because that scales. Whether I stand up a new data center, my KPIs and my targets are still there. It's like SLA attainment. It's not the number of incidents that breached. It's the number of it's the percentage that I didn't meet the SLA. That's what we want to focus in on. So again, what's the comparison? Pushback, why? And then it does allow us to get down further along to go, well, if that's what you want to have, we didn't talk about it today, but if you don't know what I'm saying, go check out the Academy on it on KPI signals. If I have kind of manual breakdowns, manual things and strings, particularly a string breakdown, or like something like breaking down on a CI, there's no trend. I'm never going to get any information from it. But if I have my backlog age and I configure KPI signals on that, I'm now going to have a computer looking to see, is my backlog age changing in a way that's not good, right? Or out of the norm. Whether I'm setting thresholds and targets, which you can do, or I'm letting KPI signals tell me, hey, this is your backlog is getting older way more than it should be, way more than it has. Let's leverage the power of PA to do that. But you got to have consistent, comparable numbers, okay, consistent, comparable KPIs. So lots of great stuff in there. There was another question that we can talk about unless anything else has come in.
Are you talking about the script question?
The script one, yeah.
Yeah.
So the script question that came in, and I can't quite tell from this, but I will say if we're using metrics, I believe we're using metrics in this example with for MI start.
Right. That's what I'm looking at here.
So by default, metrics are wall clock. This is one of the big issues, and I know we have an academy on comparing metrics and SLAs. Metrics are generally wall clock, and you can convert it to a schedule. It gets a bit weird to do calendar time, but generally, if I want to have calendar time or business hours, I'm going to use an SLA to do what I'm looking for anyway. And it depends on the metric whether an SLA is possible or not possible, and all that stuff. Your script gets just way more complicated if you want to instantiate a calendar. So there, I believe it is glide schedule. It's either glide calendar or glide schedule. I apologize, I don't recall. That you can call in your script and give it 2 dates and give it a calendar and the time zone, and it will calculate the business hours according to that schedule to get the diff. It's possible to do. It's a little complicated, and your script gets a little bit bigger. Most of what we do with metrics is just straight wall clock, and there is no difference. And that works for a lot of things and is very consistent. But if you do need to have business hours instead of wall clock, take a look and see if you can use SLA somehow instead of metrics. And if not, if you want to post a question in the community or look in the community if there's an answer. If not, we can take a look at it and go from there on how to answer it. Just doing straight math with 9 hours a day, I don't think that gives it to you, because it depends which hour. But in particular, when we're talking about if you're talking about 6 months, it's not going to matter. But there is a big difference between which days If something came in at 4 o'clock on a Friday and I close it at 10 a.m. on Monday, I really only want that to be 3 or 4 hours of business time. But wall clock, it's much different. But if it came in at Monday at 4 o'clock and was closed Thursday at 10 a.m., a lot more time. So you have to have something that is is very computationally intensive. If you're doing it for every record, SLA engine handles that really, really well and very efficiently. If you do it as a glide schedule for every row, it's your job's going to run longer, but it's okay too. Just depends what you're doing. So again, take a look at the community. If there's an answer that's looking for, I will take a look. If it's glide calendar or glide schedule and calculating business time and schedules, it uses the same schedules that the SLA engine uses. So you define it there and then you can reuse it. Hopefully that answered your question enough to say, go ask in the community so we can get some real code examples for you.
Yeah, and if not, let us know and we can bring you off mute that if you need to ask something else on that particular topic. So here's a good one. Is there a way to get historical data from the newly defined metrics? I've heard this question quite a few times. I thought I heard a snicker.
Yes, and we're out of time. I'd like to wrap up.
Yeah. The short answer is no, but there's a longer answer.
The short answer is no, but yes, the default definitely does not do that. The metrics are go forward, but the key thing is audit. If you have the audit on, you actually do have the data. We don't run PA on sys audit. Reporting is blocked on sys audit by default because it's a humongous table that's not indexed. It's not meant to be queried. It's not indexed in a way that makes sense. But conceptually, the way that you would do it is you would define your metric, you go forward, and then you can write a script that looks at the audit table, and then just calculates every change. And if it's the right change, it writes the metric record. Basically replays what you do in real life. And it would calculate once you find the change, then you close out the old one, write the new one, the same thing the metrics do. And you run a one-time job, similar to a historical collection. You run a one-time job to take the audit and write those metrics for you. So it is doable, a little complicated. If you don't need it, then don't do it. And again, something you can ask in the community. Somebody might have that script or what they've used before, but if the audit was on, the data's there. It's doable.
We do need it.
That we'll take a note of that to see if we can get an example out of that without my support team yelling at me too much.
I need to look in the community. There may be something there. I'll definitely attach it to this community event. So Lena, you can find it.
Yeah. We do need it, right? Yeah.
Okay, so we have about 7 minutes left. So if you have something that you haven't put in the Q&A and you're thinking about it, if we can get it in the next 7 minutes, or I could definitely finish things out and give some time back. One interesting side note is, and I don't know how many people here have been to them, but our next session is what we call our roundtable Q&A. And that call will have probably around 6, 7, 8 gurus on it. And it really is just a first come, first serve, ask your questions, get great answers. If there is a demo that someone wants to show based on a question, we allow them to, those panelists to share their screen and do things like that. It really is a really good session. And if you have questions that you're thinking about or questions between now and 2 weeks from now, I would definitely encourage you to come. And even if you don't have questions, I think it's still a great session to listen in on because there's some pretty amazing questions that are asked and answered with just because of the amount of panelists that we have on the call. That makes it a really good opportunity to answer some really great questions. But if you can't make it, though, that same session will be out in the community, and one of the things that I like to do is actually capture each question and put a timestamp of where you'll actually get that answer inside of the recording. So please make sure that you come from that. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so I'll just get through this stuff here.
We did have a couple in the chat. So of course,
I didn't even.
Of course, I need to
What you got,
need to chastise for using the chat to ask questions, but I'm kidding. But we do prefer the Q&A. But if we can find something in the chat, we'll try to do it. There was a question regarding sharing. Are there any particular benefits to using dashboard groups over regular fulfiller groups when sharing dashboards? And I would say when it comes to sharing, I would say probably no, because one reason is that, the dashboard groups are really just part of the classic UI or responsive canvas, and that will be phased out over time. So the new dashboards in Next Experience are grouped, can be grouped in different ways. But go ahead, Adam.
Well, I was saying, it's a question here that says I read it differently. So there's
Okay.
dashboard groups in the structure and the organization of dashboards. That's what Dan was talking about
Right.
where a dashboard can be in one group or not, which does have some intrinsic sharing possibilities. But then are you talking about sharing to a group, where I create special groups that don't have any roles, but just are used for sharing data? If we're talking about, Michael, if you want to put the clarification in the chat, if you're talking about using dashboard groups to collect your dashboards together, I think that concept gets phased out into Next Experience. There's a little bit better way of doing it, not at the dashboard level, but actually more with roles. And then if you're talking about who do I share with, that's just a governance issue for you. I don't want to create a duplicate group. So if I can share to my service desk, then share to my service desk and it has roles, great. So I don't want to maintain two things. But some customers have huge groups that have kind of all the rights and all the subscriptions, all the stuff associated to it. And then it makes sense to have groups that are that don't have roles, that are just for grouping, just for sharing reports. There's nothing wrong with that, but I don't want to duplicate things just to duplicate them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would agree with that. And Stephen had a question on metrics, saying if we discover a metric has been miscalculating for years and years, I can just hear the pain in that description. Since there's no great way to update it historically, is the recommended practice to just purge it and go forward? Go forward if possible.
If it's wrong, I probably would
just purge it.
Purge it, yeah. I mean, bad data is worse than no data. At least no data, I don't have an answer. I feel I don't like giving wrong answers. It depends how off it is, right? Is it still directionally correct, or is it even directionally wrong? So I do get from that, though. We should look at creating historical metrics. And I forgot to put my caveat about the metrics. Duration metrics you can recalculate. Scripted metric, since you can do anything in a script, I don't know. It depends.
That's a good clarification. And one last. Go ahead, Ab.
Well, no, the question. Go ahead.
Some of the Q&A. I was actually typing it out. I was just gonna say that we did do an Academy session that showed that particular dashboard. So if you haven't seen that, that would probably be your really great first source, is to go to that and actually look at that and understand, because the developers that actually created that are the ones that put on that session for us. So unless I'm misreading that question, and Adam, Dan, you have another take on it, I think that session would probably be a good place to start.
Yeah, I definitely would start there. And there is a whole series of dashboards for your C-suite. And those, I believe, are all being used by ServiceNow C-suite. They look amazing. They're great examples of what's possible to do, pretty usable to come in. The one caveat will be is that they're in our innovation lab and they're not fully supported by ServiceNow. We do support the indicators underneath them, the data that's being shown, and we support how they're being built. So if it doesn't work, we probably can help you. But in the innovation lab, the full packaging of it, they're pretty working prototypes, examples that you can then configure it and take from there. But watch the Academy session on that, and definitely take a look at them. There's some amazing work being done that comes out of those.
Okay, great. And we are actually at the top of the hour. I believe all of the slides, everyone may be, let me quickly do it. Again, this information will be out on the community. Make sure that you're checking out our community page. The recordings are there. We have listed out some of the future ones also, but you can get all the previous ones, which is where you'll actually go to see the CEO dashboard. Make sure that you're checking out the pro tips if you haven't looked at those 5-minute videos that give you some really great guidance on your journey. Make sure that you're looking at Now Learning. Just search for analytics. There's some great content there as well. The advanced course is now on demand. Our sister academies that we have out there. And again, like I said, in 2 weeks, we'll have our Q&A session. So when you see this event, it's already out there in the community. If you have some questions, go ahead and put them there, and we'll take note of those and ask those questions when we get there as well. But again, it is a first come, first serve, and ask away. So with that, thank you. Thank you to Dan and Adam. I really appreciate the two of you being here and chiming in when you could on really great information. And with that, we thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.